I remember that day like it was yesterday, even though I was only 5 years old. My name is Jenna, and that was the day my life changed forever. Dad had gone on another business trip, leaving Mom and me alone in our suburban house. I was playing with my dolls in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Mom rushed to answer it, her face lighting up as she saw who was there. "Jenna, honey, go to your room and play," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. I did as I was told, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked around the corner and saw a tall man I didn't recognize. Mom was throwing clothes into a suitcase, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move before. Mom zipped up her suitcase and headed for the door. I stepped out of my hiding place, confused and scared. "Mommy, where are you going?" "I have to go away for a while, sweetie," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Be a good girl for Daddy, okay?" And just like that, she was gone. No hug, no kiss goodbye. Just the sound of a car engine starting and then fading away into the distance. I stood there, staring at the closed door, waiting for her to come back. But she didn't. The house felt bigger and emptier than ever before. As night fell, I grew more scared. I tried to turn on the lights, but I was too short to reach the switches. The darkness closed in around me, and I started to cry. "Mommy, Daddy." I called out, over and over again. But no one came. I don't know how many days passed. I was hungry and thirsty, and the dark seemed to be alive, full of monsters waiting to grab me. I cried until I had no tears left, then huddled in a corner, shaking with fear. Finally, I heard voices outside. Our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, was talking to someone. "I've been hearing a child crying for days," she was saying. "I'm worried something might have happened." The door burst open, and suddenly the house was full of people. Policemen, neighbors, and finally, my dad. "Jen," he cried, scooping me up in his arms. "Oh God, Jenna, I'm so sorry." I clung to him, sobbing with relief. Over his shoulder, I saw a policeman holding a piece of paper. "Mr. Anderson," he said gravely. "I think you should read this." Dad set me down gently and took the note. As he read it, his face crumpled. He looked older suddenly, like he'd aged years in just a few moments. "She's gone," he whispered. "Linda's gone. She left us." The next few weeks were a blur. Dad took time off work to stay with me. We had lots of visitors, relatives, friends, and a nice lady who Dad said was a child psychologist. "Jenna's been through a traumatic experience," the psychologist explained to Dad. "It's normal for her to have some fears and anxieties after what happened." And boy, did I have fears. I couldn't sleep without a light on, the dark terrified me. And I panicked whenever Dad had to leave, afraid he wouldn't come back either. The fear never really went away. It became a part of me, as much a part of my identity as my brown hair or green eyes. Jenna Anderson, the girl whose mother left her, the girl afraid of the dark, the girl always worried about being abandoned. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, life settled into a new normal. Dad and I became a team of two, figuring out how to navigate this new world without Mom. He learned to braid my hair, badly at first, but he got better with practice, and I learned how to make his coffee just the way he liked it. That changed the day Dad met Helen. I was 7 years old when Dad introduced me to her. Helen had kind eyes and a warm smile that made me feel instantly at ease. Over the next few weeks, Helen became a regular presence in our lives. She didn't try to replace my mom, something I appreciated more than I could express. Instead, she carved out her own space in our little family. One day, I overheard Dad talking to her on the phone. "I think it's time, Helen. Will you move in with us?" Helen moved in a week later. She didn't try to be my mom, but she became something just as important, a friend. She helped me with my homework, braided my hair much better than Dad ever could, and always made sure there was a nightlight in my room. As the years passed, our lives changed in other ways too. Dad's company took off, and suddenly we were moving to a big new house in a fancy neighborhood. I got my own room with a walk-in closet and a view of the backyard pool. But some things didn't change. I still slept with a nightlight. I still worried every time Dad went on a business trip. And sometimes, late at night, I'd catch Dad looking at old photos of Mom. My 10th birthday started like any other day. I woke up to the smell of pancakes, Helen's special birthday tradition for me. Dad was home from work, and we were planning a small party later. Everything seemed perfect. Then the doorbell rang. As I walked into the living room, I froze. Standing there, looking older but unmistakable, was my mother. And next to her was a little girl, about 5 years old, clutching a teddy bear and looking around wide-eyed. "Linda," Dad said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Mom took a deep breath. "Tom, I'm so sorry. For everything. I know I have no right to be here, but..." She gestured to the little girl. "This is Emma. She's your daughter." The room went silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Dad's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief, and then, something else. "My daughter?" he repeated. Mom nodded. "I was pregnant when I left. I didn't know then, I swear. Tom, I've made so many mistakes. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but Emma, she deserves to know her father." I watched as Dad knelt down to the little girl's level. "Hi Emma," he said softly. I'm your dad." Emma looked up at him shyly. "Hi," she whispered. As Dad talked to Emma, I noticed Helen standing in the doorway, her face pale. She turned and walked away quickly. I wanted to follow her, but I felt rooted to the spot. The next few hours were a blur. There were lots of adult conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, raised voices, tears. I hid in my room, hugging my knees to my chest and trying to make sense of it all. Later that evening, Dad came to talk to me. "Jenna," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I know this is a lot to take in. Your mom, she's made some big mistakes. But Emma, she's innocent in all this. She's your sister. I've decided to give your mom another chance. For Emma's sake." The next day, I watched from my window as Helen packed her car. She looked up and saw me watching. With tears in her eyes, she waved goodbye. I waved back, feeling like a part of me was leaving with her. Mom and Emma moved in that same day. Emma took the guest room, and Mom took her old place in Dad's room. It felt wrong, like she was erasing the last 5 years as if they never happened. The years that followed were complicated. Mom was back, but it wasn't the happy family reunion I might have dreamed of when I was younger. She doted on Emma, showering her with attention and affection. But with me, there was always a distance, an awkwardness that never quite went away. As for Emma, well, she was just a kid. She didn't ask to be born into this mess, and I tried not to resent her. But it was hard, especially when I saw how easily she fit into Mom and Dad's life, in a way I never seemed to. By the time I turned 18, I was more than ready to leave for college. I had chosen to study zoology. Animals had always been easier for me to understand than people. They didn't judge, didn't have complicated emotions or messy family histories. They just were. The day I left for college was bittersweet. Dad hugged me tight, his eyes misty. "I'm so proud of you, Jenna," he said. "You're going to do great things." Mom gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. "Good luck," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Emma, now 13, rolled her eyes. "Finally get my own room," she muttered. I pretended not to hear her, focusing instead on Dad's warm embrace. College was freeing. For the first time, I was away from the tension at home, the constant reminder of my complicated family situation. I threw myself into my studies, finding solace in the world of animals and nature. But even as I excelled academically, I struggled socially. Years of feeling like an outsider in my own family had left their mark. I was quiet, reserved, always afraid of getting too close to people. What if they left, like Mom had? What if they replaced me, like Emma seemed to have done? Instead, I found comfort in the college's small zoo. I volunteered there in my spare time, caring for the animals. There was a particularly grumpy old llama named Larry, who became my favorite. He didn't like most people, but he seemed to tolerate me. The years at college flew by, and before I knew it, I was graduating. As I stood in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, I scanned the crowd. Dad was there, beaming with pride. Mom and Emma were there too, clapping politely. "Congratulations, Jenna," Mom said stiffly. "Your father and I have been talking, and, well, we think it's time you started looking for your own place. You know, spread your wings." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I looked at Dad, hoping he'd contradict her, but he just looked away, his expression pained. "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course. I'll start looking right away." The days following my graduation were tense. I was back in my childhood home, but it felt anything but welcoming. Dad tried his best to make me feel comfortable, but Mom and Emma made it clear that I was an unwanted guest. "Jenna, have you started looking for jobs yet?" Mom would ask over breakfast, her tone falsely sweet. "You know, it's important to get your foot in the door early." Emma would chime in, "Yeah, and maybe you could find your own place too. It's getting kind of cramped around here." Nights were the hardest. I still needed my nightlight to sleep, a fact that didn't escape Emma's notice. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, she barged into my room. "Seriously?" she scoffed, pointing at my nightlight. "You're 22, and you still need that? No wonder you don't have any friends." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "Leave me alone, Emma," I muttered. But Emma wasn't done. At dinner the next day, she brought it up again, this time in front of everyone. "Hey, Mom, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't you think Jenna should see a therapist or something? I mean, she's an adult who's afraid of the dark and can't make friends. That's not normal, right?" I felt something snap inside me. Years of pent-up hurt and anger came flooding out. "You want to know why I'm like this, Emma?" I said, my voice shaking. "It's because when I was 5, my mother left me alone in a dark, empty house for days. Do you have any idea what that does to a child?" The table went silent. Dad looked down at his plate, his face a mask of guilt and pain. Mom's eyes widened in shock, then quickly filled with tears. "How dare you?" she cried, her voice rising dramatically. "How can you be so cruel and vindictive? I've tried so hard to make amends, to be a family again, and this is how you repay me?" As Mom continued her tearful tirade and Emma smirked triumphantly, I realized something: I couldn't live here anymore. This wasn't my home, and these people, they weren't my family. Not really. From that day on, I threw myself into job hunting with renewed vigor. Then, finally, a glimmer of hope. I had an interview scheduled at a small wildlife rehabilitation center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I left the house that morning, feeling cautiously optimistic. But when I arrived, I found a hastily scribbled note on the door. "Interviews canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. We apologize for the inconvenience." Disappointed, I headed home earlier than expected. As I unlocked the front door, I heard voices coming from the living room. Mom and Emma, deep in conversation. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. "If Jenna wasn't around at all," Emma was saying. "I mean, it's not fair that she gets any of Dad's money. She's not even really part of this family." "I know, sweetie," Mom replied, her voice soothing. "But we have to be patient. Once she moves out, it'll be easier to convince your father to change his will. We just need to keep pushing her to leave." I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. They wanted me gone, not just from the house, but from the family entirely. And they wanted my inheritance too. As I sat on my bed, my mind raced. What should I do? Should I tell Dad? But would he believe me over Mom and Emma? He'd forgiven Mom for abandoning us, after all. He loved them. Maybe he'd take their side. My first stroke of luck came when I saw a job posting for the city zoo. They needed a zoologist to assist with their wildlife rehabilitation program. It wasn't a glamorous position, but it was exactly what I'd been trained for. I sent in my application immediately, and to my surprise and delight, I got called in for an interview. The day of the interview, I stood in front of the zoo's main gate, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The head zoologist, Dr. Martinez, seemed impressed by my knowledge and passion. "You've got the job, Jenna," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the team." I could have cried with relief. Finally, something was going right. Working at the zoo was everything I'd hoped for and more. I spent my days caring for injured wildlife, educating visitors about conservation, and even assisting with research projects. In the evenings, I'd return to my tiny apartment, which I was able to rent with the money I saved. To combat the loneliness, I started participating in online forums for animal lovers and people with similar interests. That's where I met Jake. Jake was from the same city, shared my love for animals, and had a wicked sense of humor that made me laugh even on my toughest days. We started chatting regularly, sharing stories about our day and discussing everything from the latest conservation efforts to our favorite books. One day, Jake suggested we exchange photos. With trembling hands, I sent him a recent picture of me at the zoo. He responded with a photo of himself. He had kind eyes and a warm smile that made my heart skip a beat. But as much as I enjoyed our chats, the idea of meeting in person or even admitting my growing feelings terrified me. What if he rejected me once he got to know the real me? What if he left, just like Mom had? It was around this time that I started corresponding with Lily, a girl I met on a support forum for people with childhood trauma. She understood my fears in a way no one else had before. "You know what helps me?" Lily wrote one day. "I write emails to the people I can't talk to in real life. I pour out everything I'm feeling, all the things I wish I could say. But I don't send them, I just save them as drafts. It's really cathartic." Taking Lily's advice, I started writing emails to Dad. In them, I told him everything, about overhearing Mom and Emma's conversation, about how hurt I felt that he didn't seem to notice me anymore, about how I felt like an outsider in my own family. I started writing to Jake too. In these emails, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I couldn't be in our chats. "Jake," I wrote, "I think I'm falling for you. But I'm scared. I'm scared of letting anyone get close to me. I'm scared of being hurt again." These emails too remained unsent, my feelings hidden away in the safety of my drafts folder. Dad called occasionally, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. "Jenna, honey," he'd say, "why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We miss you." Each time, I'd make up an excuse. "Sorry, Dad, I've got a big project at work," or "I'm not feeling well this week, maybe next time." It was just another Saturday afternoon. I was at the mall, picking up some essentials, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Jenna, is that you?" I turned around and there she was, Helen, my former stepmother. She looked older, but her kind eyes were just the same. Before I knew it, we were hugging, years of separation melting away in an instant. That's when I noticed the young boy standing beside her, looking up at us curiously. "This is my nephew, Mike," Helen explained, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "I'm raising him now. My sister, she passed away last year." Over coffee, Helen filled me in on her life. After she and Dad split up, she'd been on her own until her sister's death left Mike in her care. We started meeting regularly after that, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Mike. One day Helen called and urgently asked to look after Mike. That evening, Mike arrived at my apartment, backpack in tow. As I prepared dinner in my tiny kitchen, I could hear him tapping away on my laptop in the living room. I'd told him he could play games if he finished his homework. When I came out of the kitchen with 2 plates of spaghetti, I found Mike looking guilty, his face pale. Jenna, he said, his voice trembling. I did something bad. I was curious, and I saw these emails in your drafts folder. And I sent them. All of them. I'm so sorry. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Those emails, my private thoughts, my deepest feelings, sent out into the world. To Dad. To Jake. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That night, after Mike left, I lay in bed, my mind racing. What would Dad think? And Jake, oh God, Jake. My phone pinged with a message notification. It was from Jake, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. What if he was disgusted by my feelings? What if he never wanted to speak to me again? I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Dad. Jenna, he said, his voice serious. We need to talk. Can you meet me at the cafe near your old high school? My heart pounded as I sat across from Dad in a small cafe. He looked tired, his face etched with lines I hadn't noticed before. I got your emails, he said quietly. Jenna, I had no idea you were feeling this way. About your mother, about Emma, about everything. I couldn't meet his eyes, shame and fear warring inside me. Jenna, look at me, Dad said, his voice gentle, but firm. I looked up, surprised to see tears in his eyes. I love you. More than anything in this world. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you weren't important to me. That was never, ever my intention. We talked for hours, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. About Mom's return, about Emma, about how I'd felt pushed aside and forgotten. Dad listened, really listened, occasionally wiping away a tear. Finally, he stood up. I need some time to process all this, he said. But Jenna, we're going to figure this out. You and me, I promise. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What would happen now? But I didn't have much time to dwell on it because my phone rang again. It was Jake. Jenna, he said, his voice warm. I got your email. And I feel the same way. I'd been too scared to say it, but I really like you. Would you like to meet for coffee? My heart soared. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. I'd love to. The next day, I met Jake at a small coffee shop. He was even more handsome in person, with a kind smile that put me at ease immediately. We talked for hours, about our fears, our dreams, our pasts. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and understood. As autumn leaves began to fall, my phone rang one crisp morning. It was Dad. Jenna, he said, his voice warm but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. I'd like you to come to Thanksgiving dinner. It's important to me that you're there. Something in his tone made me agree. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I stood on the doorstep of my childhood home, my heart pounding. Jake had offered to come with me for support, but I felt this was something I needed to face on my own. Mom opened the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Jenna, how nice of you to join us. Emma, lounging on the couch, barely looked up from her phone. Oh, you came. Dad emerged from the kitchen, enveloping me in a warm hug. I'm glad you're here, sweetheart, he whispered. As we sat down to dinner, the tension was palpable. Mom and Emma exchanged glances, their smiles strained and artificial. Dad, however, seemed oddly calm. Just as Mom began to serve the turkey, Dad cleared his throat. Before we begin, there's something we need to discuss. He reached down beside his chair and pulled out a thick manila folder. Dad began pulling out documents, laying them on the table. Linda, Emma, I've known for a while that something wasn't right. So I did some investigating. He held up a bank statement. First, I discovered regular withdrawals from our accounts that I didn't make. Quite substantial amounts, in fact. Mom's face paled. Emma suddenly found her plate very interesting. Then, Dad continued, pulling out another document. I hired a private investigator. Linda, he provided photographic evidence of your encounters with a certain gentleman at the Rosewood Hotel. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tom, I can explain. But Dad wasn't finished. He pulled out one final document, his hand shaking slightly. And finally, I had a DNA test done. Emma isn't my biological daughter. The room fell silent. Emma's phone clattered to the floor. Mom looked like she might faint. I've already spoken to my lawyer, Dad said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Linda, I'm filing for divorce. And I'm afraid I'll have to ask both you and Emma to leave this house. Mom found her voice, anger replacing shock. You can't do this. I'll take you for everything you've got. Dad's expression hardened. Actually, Linda, you won't. If you try to claim any property, I'll countersue for fraud and demand repayment of all the money you've taken, plus what I've spent raising Emma. My lawyer assures me I have a very strong case. Tears streamed down Mom's face as the reality of the situation sank in. Emma sat in stunned silence, her world crumbling around her. In the days that followed, Mom and Emma moved out. Dad and I began to rebuild our relationship, stronger than ever before. We had weekly dinners, long talks, and even started planning a father-daughter road trip. One day, over coffee, Dad hesitantly brought up Helen. I've been thinking a lot about the past, he said. About the mistakes I made. I reached out to Helen to apologize. We've been meeting for coffee, talking things through. I smiled, genuinely happy for him. That's wonderful, Dad. Helen is an amazing woman. As for me, things with Jake were going better than I could have ever imagined. He was patient, kind, and understood my fears and insecurities. With his support, I was even starting to work through my issues in therapy.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.